Hello and welcome to ConTinual, the convention that never ends. My name is Jean Marie Ward, and tonight we are going to have a special event, the 2023 Zombies Need Brains Takeover. And with me today are four of the writers, editors, and the publisher of Zombies Need Brains. Welcome, everyone. Could you tell our viewers a little bit about yourselves and how you got involved with Zombies Need Brains? Starting with you, Joshua.
Well, I am the founder and basically the sole owner of Zombies Need Brains, and it was a crazy yet boring summer, and so I was not in the middle of writing a book or under a contract for writing a book, and I literally just got bored, and Patricia and I had been talking about what to do about the fact that the big traditional publishers didn't seem to be putting out very many anthologies anymore. DAW was a stalwart of that for a while, putting out like 6 a year or something like that. But they cut back drastically, and it had been a couple of years, and so I decided, that I would actually just create the company. And we called it Zombies Need Brains after a party that we threw at a World Fantasy at one point. A bunch of the authors got together and threw it, and so I created the small press, and I roped Patricia into editing that first anthology with me, and yeah, it's been hectic ever since.
Yes. And Patricia Bray was not the only person you roped into editing for you. We have one of your editors, David B. Coe. David, could you talk a little bit about yourself and how you got involved and sucked into editing for Zombies Need Brains?
My name is David B. Coe. I also write as D.B. Jackson, and I've been a writer for 25 plus years, 30 novels to my name, and as many short stories. So I've been writing for a long time, and I actually first got involved with Zombies Need Brains as a writer. I was in several anthologies, including, was Urbar the very first one, Joshua?
Urbar was the first anthology Patricia Bray and I did, but that was published by DAW.
Okay.
And then, yeah, after that and Modern Fae, that's when we started up the publishing company. So yeah, you were way back at the beginning when we were with DAW.
Right. Yeah. So I've written. I was checking just now on my shelves. I seem to have written stories for at least a dozen of ZNB anthologies at this point. And one of the anthologies I was in as a writer, excuse me, was called Temporarily Out of Order, which was basically based on a small sign that Joshua saw on a out of order telephone. It was supposed to be temporarily out of order, but it was temporally out of order. And he thought, ooh, anthology idea. And a little while later, a couple of years later, I got an email. It was a spam email. And I was told that one of my accounts that I actually didn't have had been temporarily deactivated. And I forwarded the message to Joshua, and I said, this should be a follow-up to the first anthology. And he said, I agree. Want to co-edit it with me? And I've been roped in ever since. The one that came out this year, Artifice and Craft, is my fifth anthology that I've co-edited for Zombies Need Brains. And I love working with Joshua. I love working with the house. We've had some great writers working on the various anthologies, both the ones I've been in and the ones I've edited. It's been positive all the way through.
Yeah, it has been a positive experience speaking as an author, at least for me, but I don't know about for Jason. How did you get involved in all of this?
Well, Josh learned, I guess, about the same time you started Zombies is when I started writing. Said that I wanted to write, right? Probably within a year or so.
Well, I mean, you've been writing before that, but I think that's when you first decided that, oh, maybe I should try to get published.
Yeah, that's probably true. And so then Josh, I was like, I want to write novels, and Josh was like, well, try some short stories first. And so I did a few short stories, and then they weren't very successful. And then I guess the first one was you invited me to be in the Steampunk versus Aliens.
Yeah.
Yeah, you invited me to be in that. So I wrote a story, which actually wasn't too, like, I look back on it now and I'm like, but but the premise of it, the plot, I really like, and I love the characters. But my writing wasn't, has improved, luckily. Um, but then after that, you just said, hey, submit to the slush pile, and so then that's what I've been doing ever since then. And I have an okay acceptance rate. I probably get there's a few that I haven't made any of my stories in, but most of the time I get into one of the anthologies. And so that's sort of how I ended up with, Z&B stories in there. And that was good actually. At the time I was kind of like, oh, I want to write novels and I'm writing short stories and it's, taking time that I could be writing a novel. But in the end, yeah, when I look back on it, I'm like, oh yeah, that was great practice to just get better at writing in general, and also to, just the plot arc and all that kind of stuff, the character arcs you have to do in a short story. Same as a novel, you just gotta, in a novel, you spread it out. So it's a really good way to practice. And so and it's, there's not that many markets out there for short stories, so it was great to have one that was consistent. That Zombies is going to have some anthologies every year. So that's pretty much how I got involved.
Joshua and I bought a story from Jason from the Slush for Galactic Stew, and it's a terrific story. I love that story.
Yeah, that was fun.
Funnily, it's an apocalyptic story, and yet somehow it got into Galactic Stew, even though Apocalyptic was out that year.
Yeah, it was all about cooking the apocalypse. They came up with actually, the funny thing is, this is how it worked. Josh asked me to do short stories. At the time, I had a friend who wanted me to do screenplays. So I was actually writing screenplays and trying to write books at the same time. And then Josh was like, let's do short stories. And I'm like, And so, but my friend who was doing the screenplays was like, oh, we need some like TV show ideas. And I came up with one called Apocalypse Chow. And it was about eating at the end of the world. And my idea was that, like, hey, if you go to a fancy restaurant, they'll serve you like wild rice with like steamed trout and some like watercress or something, like, right? I'm like, well, that's all stuff that you forage for. Like, so at the end of the world, right, you could eat kind of nice and like a fancy restaurant would be charging $100 for it, but you could just get it out there. So the TV show would be about eating well at the end of the world. And then that didn't go anywhere. So then I wrote the short story sort of with the same idea. Like, it's the end of the world, but these people are, it's not really about the eating, but it was supposed to be about food stuff. So at the end of the world, they're essentially, bonding over food.
Yeah. As one does. And, one of the things I find useful about short stories and anthologies and magazines is that you get editorial input, and you get it a lot faster than you get it, as Joshua and David certainly know, then you would get it if you were accepted to a traditional publisher, for a novel, because it could take years. Troy, are you a novelist or primarily a short story writer?
I would say I have more short stories published because I only have one novel published, but I much prefer the novel writing. Short stories are tough. I mean, they've got to be tight, they've got to be compact, they've got to tell the story quickly. It's a lot of time consumed, and you're not going to get rich off writing novels, but you'll certainly make a whole lot more than writing short stories. So
this is truly advanced. So tell folks that you're the newcomer to this party. At least to me, this is my first meeting with you. Tell us about yourself, and how did you get roped into The Last Ditch, which is one of the anthologies that we're going to be talking about a little bit later. How did Joshua suck you into Zombies Need Brains?
I don't think Joshua had to suck me in. So I came about writing a little different. I always knew I wanted to write. My grandmother was a huge writer. I used to sit as a kid on her typewriter, but I ended up going another route. And so a few years ago, I retired after 30 years in the military. And so there wasn't a whole lot of time to write, but I've got a lot of world experience. I fought in Iraq. I've lived in Turkey. I've been to the caves of Cappadocia. I've been to Afghanistan. And so Josh and I became friends, I guess, on the convention scene, and we're both authors. And I don't know if it was him or me sitting around, but I said, I used to be a slush reader. I used to do slush reading for a small press. And I was like, I'd really like to edit one of the anthologies. I'm pretty good at it. And he said, come up with an idea. And one of the things we were trying to get is a little bit of military flavor into it. So we did, I think I proposed, Josh, the Razor's Edge one, to do, the insurgency, good, evil, one man's freedom fighters, another one. Allows me to pull in a little bit of real world experience, but it's so much better to write in the fantasy and science fiction setting because you can set all the conditions you want for what story you want to tell, and no one can come back and say, well, that's not my war, that's not the way it was for me, or this is not how insurgencies really work. So I guess that's how I got pulled in. And then after doing that one, I really enjoyed it. And Josh, Gerald and I have been kicking around wanting to do one with him for a while, and Last Ditch kind of came about a little convoluted. I think Gerald is more in favor of the spy and espionage, and I was kind of more in favor of this Last Ditch heroic effort. And so we just kind of put the two together, and we'll basically have Last Ditch heroic efforts of spies and espionage in science fiction and fantasy.
Yeah. Why do I keep thinking Hail Mary pass?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes a spy or espionage can be your Hail Mary and your only chance of winning. I mean, the epitome of that is Star Wars and the Death Star plans with.
Yes.
It all hinges on a spy stealing plans to save the war effort.
Yes, it does. Though some folks will tell you it's Luke and the Force, but we aren't going to argue that point, right?
No.
Of course not.
So since we started on this year's, you're going to start a Kickstarter August the 15th. Do I have that right, Joshua?
Yes, August 15th, noon Eastern.
Yeah. For the 11th year of Zombies Need Brains. And you're going to have 3 anthologies, one of them being Last Ditch, another of them being, and I know this, full disclosure, I'm in it, Familiars. And then you've got a very special thing planned for this year, a shared world that is not going to basically have an open call. So could you tell us about this Kickstarter and these anthologies? And, basically you and Troy can go to town on Last Ditch, and David and Jason, are you guys going to be in Familiars?
No, we're going to be in the shared world.
Ah, okay. And you too, Jason?
Well, I have to think. I'll be submitting to the Slush, so I'll have to think about. I haven't actually thought about those. Okay. I know I'll be doing one for the shared world, so
okay. So yeah, okay, great. So Joshua, could you get that ball rolling and tell folks what they can expect?
Okay, so yes, this is year 11 of the Zombies Need Brains string of Kickstarters, and I will say I'm shocked that we are still going, especially since right now I think we have 26 anthologies out, and so if this year's Kickstarter is successful, we'll be up to 29. And when we started with Clockwork Universe, I would have guessed that it would be dead within 5 years. So, so a little surprising there, but yes. So year 11, and last year was year 10. We went a little overboard and did 4 anthologies and all that. So we're back to our usual 3 this year, and as you said, one of them is going to be a little bit special, a little bit different. But typically what we do is we run a Kickstarter for the anthology, and we have half of the authors already chosen. We call those anchor authors. So some of the people here are anchor authors. And then we do an open call if the Kickstarter is successful. We do an open call so anybody can submit, and as long as their story's on theme and makes the cut, then they'll be in the anthology. And so we fill out the rest of the anthology with the open call stories. So this year we have 2 anthologies that are going to have open calls. So the first one is called Familiars. And for that one, it's going to be edited by Patricia Bray and myself. And I mean, the title kind of says it all. Basically, it's supposed to be stories in science fiction and fantasy that involve a familiar. So, I mean, the standard, I guess, is that you have a human main character and an animal familiar, but we're open to things where you twist that around. Maybe the main character is a dragon and the familiar is a human, or something along those lines. We're always open to variety if you pull it off well. And we have a bunch of anchors already chosen for this one. Obviously, Jean Marie is one of the anchors. We've also got J.C. Bedford, Jim C. Hines. We've gotten him back. He was in a DAW anthology, Patricia and I did earlier on, way early on. We have Jeannie Cook and B.B. Bayless are going to write a story for us. Sharon Lee and Steve Miller, Shauna McGuire, and Carrie Sparing. They're going to be the other anchors for that anthology. But yes, basically stories where there is a familiar, and obviously, since it's called Familiars, the familiar should play an exceedingly important part in the story. It shouldn't just be a witch story and the cat's just there. It should be a witch story where the cat does something and solves the problem, whatever the story's problem is. So yeah, we're interested in stories where the familiar is extremely important to the stories. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about what you're doing for that one, or you want me to move on to the next one?
I basically, yeah, I think I will not. Let us just say, though, that I have drafted the first act, and yes, it's going to be very twisty, and it's going to be sci-fi, and you did not put my thing on the cover. And I really, no, seriously, it is a gorgeous cover. And can you share it?
Pull it up here. There it is. So yes, this is called a wraparound cover. So you're seeing on the left side, that's going to be the back of the book, and then the spine, of course, is going to be in the middle, and then where all the animals are on the right side, that's going to be the front covers. So like I said, at one point, maybe it was pre-recording, but this is Justin Adams of Various Studios, and he's been doing our cover art for ages. And I mean, initially it's like, oh, there's a kangaroo, and oh, there, but if you really take a closer look, they're not quite exactly the familiar animals from our world. So it's got that fantasy aspect to it, and of course, it's just, I mean, he's just really, really good for our cover artists. And and I should probably mention that you can get prints of all of our covers from Justin in the Kickstarter and online and whatnot. So if you really like this cover, then you can help the Kickstarter out and order a print along with whatever else you're ordering. So,
and I was just about to say that you could, and I bet looking at these animals, there are going to be a lot of folks who take inspiration from the cover, because I know that one of your stories in Game On was written to that cover.
Yeah,
and it was one of the best stories in that anthology. So yeah, Slush is an incredible source of good material, to say nothing of people like you've mentioned for the Familiars anthology, Shauna, and all the rest, JC, everybody. I mean, I'm so honored to be in their company, that I'm really excited about it, and I hope that everybody enjoys my story as well as theirs. Though I must say that my cat feels neglected. I have a black cat, so he's saying, wait a minute. But I know that with the company I'm in, they're going to do cat stories I couldn't even approach. So we're just going to go in another direction. But anyway, the other anthology that will have an open call is the one that Troy and Gerald Brandt are editing for. So could you talk about that a little bit next, and then we'll work up to the shared world, because we've got two of the writers here as well for that one. But Joshua, Troy, could you tell us a little bit about Last Ditch?
Yeah,
More than you told us when you were talking about. Because I'm sure you've got some ideas that you haven't shared yet.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to jade people. I want people to, hey, if it's spy and it's espionage and it has to do with, some Herculean effort to save something, whether that's fantasy or science fiction, I want to read it. I don't want to influence anybody going in any direction, because I'll tell you, you can start a story and go, wow, this doesn't feel like it would fit. And by the time you get to the end, wow, this was beautiful, it's awesome, and it's amazing. So all I can say is, people need to write their best story they can. And if it fits in fantasy and science fiction, and it's a heroic effort, whether for the good side or the bad side with spies or espionage, hey, bring it on. And, may the best submitters get their stories in.
So it's going to be exclusively focused on spies. It's not necessarily going to be focused on military actions that may not be spy related, because
everything should be spy and espionage on this one. Doesn't have to be military science fiction at all, although that's also certainly welcome. I mean, we have some great writers in it. Lee Modesett, he'll be writing a story, and Steve Perry, who's written a lot of military science fiction, is going to be in the anthology as well. So I have a feeling we'll get a few that do have a little bit of military flavor, but
Tanya Huff.
Who has done both sides of it, military and non-military, yes.
Yeah. Josh, do you have anything you want to add about it, or?
I probably just mentioned the other anchors just so people know. We have Jason M. Huff. He's going to be in it. Elaine Isaac. Blake Jessup, who is a writer who we became aware of through The Slush. I think his first story was in The Razor's Edge that Troy also edited with me. So he's been in a couple of them, and he just is a great writer. So this is his first anchor author appearance with us, though. Then we have Daryl Murphy. Gerald Brandt got invited him at a recent convention and whatnot, and then Edward Willett is going to round out the anchors for that one. So the ones that Troy mentioned, plus all of those. So some really good anchor authors for that one.
Yeah, Blake. I just wanted to mention Blake Jessup again. We found him in The Razor's Edge, and he ended up being the lead-off story because, at least from my perspective, it was the greatest thing submitted in all of the Slush pile. At least it was amazing to me. And I know he's been up for a couple of awards in the last couple of years. So, I mean, phenomenal writer. So I can't wait to see what Blake throws at us for this one.
Oh, cool. Very cool. I'll have to look up The Razor's Edge, because I confess, although I've gotten just about all of the anthologies in electronic format, so many books, so little time. But hearing a recommendation like that, I'll have to go look it up. But these two traditional anthologies are not the only thing you've got going on in this particular Kickstarter. And could you tell us a little bit about the Shared World Anthology? Its title, what you're hoping to accomplish, and if the writers who are here, Jason and David, could tell us a little bit about where they hope to take it. You don't have to tell us anything about the story, but maybe just give us an idea of where you're going to fit in the schema of this particular work.
So yes, the Familiars and the Last Ditch anthologies, those are going to have open calls, and we'll get, like I said, half of the authors for the anthology from the submission pile. And that's how we traditionally do our anthologies, or we've been doing them since we started. But this one is a little bit different. I've had this on the back burner for quite a while. I've always wanted to do a shared world anthology, a la like Thieves World and Wild Cards, and all of those kinds of things. And I wanted to do one like probably 8 years ago, but I didn't have a good idea, and I finally came up with the idea for this anthology. So we're calling it Imperium. Imperium is the name of a city, and the city has been created by a group of extremely powerful mages, I guess we'll just call them, called Magnum. And basically the city is walled in, it's octagonal. It's walled in, and on each of the 8 sides of the wall, there are portals to other worlds. So basically, the city is a mixing pot for these 8 worlds. And so essentially, for this first anthology, there's not going to be an open call. Instead, I invited 7 authors to basically create the world on the other side of the portal, although their story has to be more or less set inside the city of Imperium itself. So they get to create the culture in the world and typical fantasy world building kinds of things for the world on the other side. And then we get to get a little bit of a glimpse of that world through their story in Imperium. And then the idea is that this anthology will establish the 8 worlds, and it will establish the city, and it's kind of the groundwork, the foundation for future anthologies. And the hope is that if the Kickstarter this year is successful, then next year we will do a themed anthology where we will do an open call set in this world, because then people will know what the world's all about and what the cultures are all about, etc., etc. So that's kind of the broad strokes of it.
Is this going to be an epic fantasy world, or are there other genres that could come into play since you are opening portals to 8 different worlds?
The general feel is supposed to be fantasy oriented, although we are allowing the anchor authors, so to speak, I mean, it's possible that they can have some kind of higher tech in their world, and it's like regulated how that higher tech is allowed into the city. Because the Magnum act as sort of policemen for the entire city, and as long as they're not interfering, then you can pretty much get away with whatever you want. It's when they start noticing and putting their hand in the pot that you have to worry. So yes, and so there can be different levels of tech between the worlds. I have kind of put a restriction on it. I don't want one of the portals to be to our world. I don't want it to be heavy duty sci-fi. But we are willing to go. I am willing to go, to a certain level in terms of the tech.
Well, steampunk, considering steampunk versus aliens, it just sort of, like, is there a possibility that somebody may take it to one of those worlds? But I guess the people to ask are Jason and David. So tell us a bit, if you can, about the worlds you've decided to create.
Go ahead. I'm pulling rank here. Go ahead.
I think Josh and I hadn't decided quite yet. I think I decided that I was going to take the portal, the gate that's not a portal, that it actually leads out to the world that Imperium's located on, right? That's what I've been thinking in my head.
So yes, the one of the gates technically isn't a portal. One of them is actually a gate, because the city is set on that, or was built on that world.
Yeah.
So Jason had a choice between 2 gates, because out of the 8 gates, there's one that's sealed and is no longer being used, and I took that one. And then there's one and the one that's been sealed has been sealed for like 200 years, 300 years, something like that. And then there's one gate that has basically been destroyed. And so Jason had a choice between the gate to the actual real life gate to the world the city is on, or the destroyed gate. And so I guess he's chosen the world gate.
Yeah, that's the one I thought the most about. So I think I'm going to do the real world gate. And you know, at this stage, since we haven't really had a big meeting to figure out like what other people are thinking of doing, the only thing we've had is Josh sent a story in about his gate that involved his gate. And so that was actually pretty instructive because of the length of it, which is like about 12,000 words. And I'm very used to writing 5,000 to 6,000 words, you know, short stories. So that'll be a interesting challenge. But then also how the stories end. You know, in this case, it needs to end. Usually, you try to wrap it up so it's got some sort of conclusion that, you know, is satisfying to the reader and all that kind of stuff. But in this one, it needs. I realized after reading Josh's story that the ending is more of a beginning, and so your ending needs to sort of be open-ended in the sense of, oh, okay, this is how this story developed, and it ends with this development that the next people who are going to be writing for the anthology can take somewhere. So, like, I don't need to be taking it somewhere, but somebody else can be writing a story on that. So, I do have a couple ideas based off of that, you know, reading Josh's story. And I think what I'll do is I will wait to see what the other authors have developed for their gates. And then, you know, modify mine so that the world that it's on doesn't overlap with any of their, you know, main ideas and stuff. So, the main idea that I have is fairly general. So I don't think it'll be a problem to adapt it to what other people are doing. But yeah.
To avoid conflict, I imagine that the editorial meetings after everybody's stories are in are going to be rather interesting because no matter how hard you try not to step on each other's toes in a situation like this, having been in shared world anthologies before, and no, I'm not part of this, so I'm not saying that. But rather that I know the process can be very, if not fraught, you have to be careful because something that you do innocently can have a rather major effect on somebody else's story, and you have to worry about that. But you brought up something that I do want to address before I get to you, David. 12,000 words, novelette length. Is that going to be the standard for this anthology?
Yeah, when I sent out the proposal, I said they could write something up to 15,000 words. But then I also said that, you know, if you could stick right around 12,500, something like that, that would be the golden number, so to speak, for everybody. And then, of course, I had to sit down and write a story, and I was like, I don't know if I can make 12,500 or not, because I'm used to writing novels. But the story I wrote actually ended up right at 12,550. So it was right there. I was happy about that. Nobody's told me yet whether they think my story sucks, but we'll when we have our first actual meeting, which we plan on doing hopefully in the next week or so, to discuss things. On the assumption that the Kickstarter is going to fund, we will discuss some things ahead of time and help people. That's why I wrote my story first, is I wanted to give everybody kind of a vague idea of what it was we were kind of shooting for here. But yeah, 12,000 for this one. But then the follow-up one next year, I'm going to invite all of these anchor authors back so they can come back and write a story if they want. For next year, that will be the standard 6,000, 7,500 max length. And the open call will be the 6,000, 7,500 word length. This one I gave them a little more freedom because they're establishing a world, and they have to establish a world well enough that other people can dabble in that world. So.
And that takes word count. Let's just face it. If you're establishing something, it does take word count. I mean, we all remember the old school fantasies where the first chapter was getting you into the world, even if it was a generic. We've got dwarves, orcs, and dragons, and we're still at what some people think is the Middle Ages, though they seldom are. You know, we have to do that. So 12,000 words to establish a component of a very large world is really not that much.
No.
So anyway, David, have you picked your gate? And
Well, I thought I had, but now I'm hearing that the destroyed gate is still available.
Yes, technically, if Jason doesn't want to use the destroyed gate, then you could use the destroyed gate if you want.
Okay, so how does the destroyed gate work?
You get to decide. I mean, like what do you mean? It's
Like-
destroyed, so it's not in use.
Right, so then are the people from the world trapped in Empyreum?
Yes, they're trapped in Imperium, and as far as they know, they have no way to get back. And the gate's been destroyed for, if I remember right, 57 years.
And look at the
and
other
do we
way.
know why it was destroyed?
No,
That's left to the author.
the author gets to decide how it was destroyed.
Okay.
And not only
Why
that,
it was
any people from Imperium would be stuck on the other, who were traveling at that point, would be stuck on the other side of the destroyed gate too.
Yes, and that could be future stories, but these stories have to be centered inside the city.
Okay.
Okay, I would like to think about this. So I have vague ideas for my world and for the magic system in the world. And part of that idea involves people who are known as trinities, or trins for short. And they are people who can magically split themselves into three versions of themselves: physical, emotional, and logical. And they're not liked anywhere where they exist, the trins, because, and especially in Empyreum, because they can separate the emotional from the logical, and that makes them very, very powerful negotiators in any business setting. And you can't tell when a trin is its composite self or just one of the three. But they can't stay separate from one another for very long. If they're apart for more than 2 or 3 hours, they start to go through what would kind of resemble a hypothermic reaction. They really start to kind of break down physically. So that's my idea for the magic system in the world. I can't tell if Joshua is laughing because he hates it or because he likes it.
No, I like it. I think it's
David, I just want to know, can one split off and the other two? So you have a combination of two and one split off. So it
Yeah.
has to be all three or all
It's
together?
all three or one. And my original idea was that they're persecuted in their own world because it's seen as unnatural, and they don't like, there's all kinds of politics involved. And as they've been persecuted over the years, they are tortured. And when they're tortured, they automatically split into three because the physical seeks to protect the other two. And so it's this. Anyway, so I've thought about this a lot, as you can tell. But I think it works really, really well with them being from the destroyed gate and having to blend into Empyreum without drawing too much attention to themselves.
Yeah, the question that comes to my mind, because I write comedy, is when they split, the same problem I have with wares, as one of the anthologies was all about wares.
Yep.
Yeah, I know. What happens to the clothes?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll have to work on that.
Psychic clothes, and they all get them. Psychic clothes, yeah.
Okay, before we go on to something else, like the anthologies that are coming out this year or have come out this summer, by the time this airs, and the Zombies Need Brains presents, ZNB presents, which is Zombies Need Brains magazine arm. Since we do have two of the editors for this year's open call anthologies with us, could you give our viewers a very quick, what can you do to up your chances of being pulled from the slush? We've already established you want broad breadth. and not to worry too much about whether or not, it's too specific. But is there something else that you can tell people that you want to see from them, other than the best story they can possibly write?
Do you want to go first, Troy?
No, you get to go first. I went first.
I get to go first? Okay, I think the biggest thing that I would like to emphasize about Zombies Need Brains is that we are looking for stories that are a little bit longer. We are looking for the stories that have been developed, and so there's a character arc, and there's a plot arc, and there's some depth to the world and everything, and I really, really find it hard to believe that somebody can do all of that in like 1,000 words. So we are not really a flash market. We like the depth. So our typical stories are usually somewhere between like 4,000, 6,000, 7,500. So on the longer side. We have accepted shorter stories. We have, I think out of all 26 of our anthologies, we have 2 that are like 1,500. So I know it can be done shorter, but it's like really, really hard to convince us that you have a really good developed story here with the shorter length. So don't constrain yourself. Give yourself some room to develop the story. And personally, I'm almost always more interested in a character story than an idea story or a plot-driven story. So I'm looking for a character arc, some kind of character development, and those are the stories that are going to catch my attention a little bit more. And I'd like the stories to have all 3 of the elements I already mentioned, like the character and the plot and the world. I like all 3 of them in there. I want a robust story. That's what it boils down to. So those are the big things I would emphasize off the top of my head. Anything you want to add, Troy?
So yeah, I'll add one thing. So yes, I love what you're saying about the character and the plot in a more developed story. But getting along is boring. I want to see the conflict. I want to know what this person wants and why they can't have it, and what's opposing them and what they have to do. And if you can tell me a story that starts out with some great conflict and I'm really rooting, and then turn it around so that by the end I'm rooting for both the bad side and the good side, that's even better, because nobody's just evil. Whatever's blocking what they want should also have a motive that may not be right, but there's reasoning behind it and logic. So it's not just somebody being evil. So when you can make me have sympathy for both sides of the conflict of your story, and you can get good conflict into that, and characters and the plot, it's a fantastic story.
This sounds like a lot of really, really great stuff. Is there a URL yet that we can direct viewers to?
Yes, we are planning on using the tiny URL /ZNB Kickstarter 2023. So tinyurl.com/ZNB Kickstarter 2023.
Great. I'm going to have you repeat that at the end of the video so that we can go forward with it and have it. It's the last thing people hear, because they say that you have to repeat things 3 times for it to stick in people's memories.
Yes.
But speaking of 3s, actually speaking of 4s, the Kickstarter isn't the only thing you've got going on this summer. You've got 4 anthologies funded by the 2022 Kickstarter, your 10th anniversary Kickstarter, out now. And in fact, we have at least one of the editors here besides yourself. So actually, you're another writer in Dragonesque, right?
Yeah, I'm both a
David?
writer and an editor this year.
Oh, okay. So then David, could you talk about the anthologies that are coming out this year that you are in as an editor or as a writer? And Joshua, could you talk about the rest?
Certainly. Go ahead, David.
So the first anthology I'll talk about is this one, Artifice and Craft. It is co-edited by Edmund Schubert and me. The basic idea is we wanted works of art that are cursed or magical or highly technological. There's at least one really good science fiction story in here by James Maxey. And we got a terrific selection of stories. Our anchor authors included C.E. Murphy, Alethea Contis, James Maxey. We got a slush story from James Tuck that was so good we included that. And we also have a story from Adam Stempel that is phenomenally good. And we have stories about paintings, story about pieces of music, stories about sculptures. It was a really fun project to work on. So that's one of them. And then the other one is Dragonesque, which was edited by Joshua and S.C. Butler, Sam Butler. And for this one, I was an anchor author. The idea of the anthology was they wanted dragon stories, but written from the dragon's point of view. And so I actually have the final story in the anthology. And my dragon is a reenactor who works at Ren fairs and such, doing dragon stuff for pay. But my dragon gets tired of always losing, and things ensue.
As they do, yes. Full disclosure, I'm in that one as well, and my story is Ward Bai and the Magic Pirate, featuring a shape-shifting dragon in Ming-era China, specifically Nanjing, 1421. And being a former government wonk, yes, I was one of the people who made your life miserable, Troy. I worked for DOD. I decided I really wanted to let a dragon loose in a government conference. Things ensue.
As they do.
Joshua, tell us about the other anthologies.
Okay, so let's start with Game On. So Game On anthology. And this one's edited by, I don't know if this is how you pronounce his name correctly, but it's Stephen Kodowich. That's how I've been saying it. And Tony Pye. And as the title suggests, this is all short stories, sci-fi fantasy short stories, with a game of some sort integral to the story. So the games range from like card games, like there's Solitaire for 3 here, is one of the stories, and so card games all the way up to, you know, RPG games and video games and the full spectrum of games here. But it is games as in board games and video games and stuff. It is not sports games. There are no sports games in here. So so again, a really good anthology that Stephen and Tony put together here. Some of the anchor authors were like Ed Greenwood, who people probably know from Dungeons and Dragons fame. And we have Cat Rambo, Wolf Moon, James Allen Gardner is one of the anchors for this one, Sean Williams, and just Eric Choi wrote us a story. He's been an anchor for a couple anthologies now. And his was really good. It's gambling. His was gambling. So definitely an anthology to check out, in my opinion, but of course I'm biased. But that would be Game On, and I think you said earlier that the cover of that inspired one of the stories. So.
I realized as you were talking about Game On, it was actually the Modern Deities Guide for Surviving Humanity, and you had that computer spread.
Yes.
And Daniel Roman, I believe, is the author who wrote about an Aztec god in Los Angeles, and he wrote it to the cover image.
Yes,
so,
yes.
Yeah.
It was about an Aztec god running a gaming company. So
yeah. That was a great story. I really loved it. Yeah.
Yes, that was a very good story. And a funny little side story here. Daniel Roman, I teach mathematics at SUNY Oneonta, but every now and then there's a student coming through who wants to like write a fantasy novel, and I do an independent study with them And he was one of the students that came through with the independent study program. And so I worked a semester with him working on his fantasy novel. And then, I mean, that was like 10 years ago. If not more than 10 years ago. And then all of a sudden he popped up in the submission stack, and it was like, oh, and look at that, it's a good story.
It was a very good story, and I say that as one of the anchor authors of that anthology.
Yeah.
It was, the artwork is lovely that you get for these anthologies. I really, really enjoy them. But
yeah.
we have another anthology that hasn't been mentioned yet.
The fourth one that we put out and is available now is called Solar Flare. And this is one that Patricia Bray and I edited. And the subtitle is Solar Punk Stories. And Patricia Bray and I wanted solar punk stories, but we also wanted it to skew to hopeful stories, like, obviously climate change and destroying the earth and all that kind of stuff is a pretty heavy topic, but we wanted stories that were set in the future where we, if not solve the problems, or on our way towards solving those problems, and so there was a hopeful outcome or a hopeful outlook regarding the future and climate change and all that, and which I think is challenging if you're trying to write a story with, as Troy said, some conflict in it. How do you do that when everything's supposed to be solved? It was very interesting reading the submission stack for this because of that restriction. We got a lot of good stories, but they weren't really necessarily hopeful stories. So that limited our selections a little bit, requiring the hopeful solar punk outlook. So those are the four that we ended up putting out from the Kickstarter we did in 2022. So all really good anthologies, even if I wasn't editing them, and everybody should definitely check them all out. And if you're interested in some of them, you can always get them through the Kickstarter and help support the Kickstarter at the same time. So,
and you can get those and some of the other older anthologies as well, I believe.
Yes. Pretty much anything that we put out at this point, you can get through the Kickstarter if you want.
Plus plushies and incentives and Tuckerizations. Oh,
there's
yes.
Every editor gets to pick their plushie avatar, so to speak.
Oh my! What? I can't see yours, Troy. It's small.
Troy's is a little lion.
Oh. And David's is an owl.
Yep.
Yeah, great horned owl.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
He was very specific. He didn't just say, "I want to be a panda." I want to be a red panda with black feet and.
This is why Joshua had to come up with the golden word count for the shared world, because he knows that I always go long, even in the description of my plushie.
You're not the only one, David. He's had to go. Jean Marie, 9,000 is too long.
Yeah.
More than once.
We always provide helpful suggestions on where to cut.
Yes.
Yes, you do, and I appreciate that. This is why I was saying earlier, basically one of the great joys of actually doing short stories is getting really, really good editorial guidance, because writing is you're sitting in a room in the dark. I don't care if the lights are on. It's really dark inside one's head, and you need that feedback to know where you're going right or wrong. And unfortunately, obviously, Daniel proves that the one-on-one sessions that you do with folks, Joshua, will work. But for a lot of us, the instruction we got in our various writing courses was, why do you want to do genre fiction?
Yep.
You should be writing literature.
Right.
Yeah.
Or why do you keep writing flash fiction? You have to write novels. It's all valid, but it can take years to get that to understand that. And so markets like Zombies Need Brains, where you get so much editorial feedback, are really, really useful to a writer at any level of their development, I think. And I think you would agree with me, David, that, you know, getting feedback from somebody other than yourself.
Oh, absolutely. And I've worked with Troy as an editor, and I've worked with Joshua as an editor, and both of them are terrific editors. And both of them improved the stories that I wrote for them vastly with their suggestions, with their places to cut, places to expand, and feedback. And it was a pleasure working with both of them. I have no doubt that the anthologies they're doing for next year are going to be amazing.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to them as well. Not necessarily looking forward to the editorial letters because it's good, but it's painful. But you know, but yeah, I am looking forward to it. But before we close out on this, the Kickstarter, the anthologies, you're running a magazine as well, Joshua. So could you tell the folks a little bit about CNB Presents, which is in the middle of its second year, I believe, right now, and you've just run an open call to get the rest of the stories. So tell us about that.
I decided I wanted to do a magazine for a while, because one of the problems with the themed anthologies is when you're reading the submissions, you can run across a really, really, really good story, and it's just not on theme. And if it's not on theme, you can't do anything with it for the anthology. And so I'm like, we're missing out on all these good stories, and just because they're not on theme. And, you know, one of the ways to potentially capture such stories is through a magazine that has no theme. So, except obviously sci-fi fantasy. So I wanted to run one for a while, and so when we hit year 10, and I realized that we'd made it 10 years, one of the things I wanted to do to make the year a little bit more special is to start up ZNB Presents. So right now it's a magazine that we're running through Patreon. So just look up Zombies Need Brains on Patreon, you'll find it. We're doing 2 original stories every month. We publish one put up one on the 1st and one on the 15th of every month. Every story gets its own illustration. And then at the end of the year, we put out an anthology that compiles all 24 stories from that year. So the year 1 just ended. The last story went up on June 15th of 2023. And so we have the anthology, the compilation anthology out. ZNB Presents Year 1. Cover is again by Justin Adams. It's a little glary there, but check it out online. Great cover again from Justin. And so check that out. And we started year 2 on July 1st. This year, and so right now, like when this goes up, I think we'll have 4 stories up. We'll have the July stories and the August stories up. And the way the Patreon runs is if you become a patron or a subscriber to the magazine, if you're at the $2 level, then you get the ebook of the compilation anthology at the end of the year. And if you do the $4 one, you get the ebook and the trade paperback of the anthology at the end of the year, as long as you've been a patron for, I think it's 8 months out of the year. So you don't have to do it necessarily every single month, but as long as you get 8 months in there, then you'll get the ebook or the trade at the end of the year. So we need subscribers. So if you want to support sci-fi fantasy, right now we're a little bit low on subscribers. But yeah, if you want to support it, then go check it out, become a patron, and hopefully the magazine will last beyond 2 years.
Well, you know, if you want to support, you know, magazines, if you want to support sci-fi and fantasy, if you want to support writers, and if you want to support illustrators, and these are all people, folks. They're not AI. I know at least one of the illustrators personally.
And I should add that all of the stories, there's no anchor authors, nobody's invited. All
Right.
of the stories are coming from an open call. So it's submit, and if your story is good enough and makes the cut, then you're in the magazine. So I have always and hopefully will always do open calls for pretty much everything except like the shared world where we have to establish it first.
Yeah.
But if I can do an open call for something, I want to do an open call.
Yep, and I think that's great. So we're coming up on the end of our time together tonight, and so I'm going to ask everybody to tell us what your work is. The most recent work is. It can be a ZNB project. It can be something else, and where folks can find you on the web. Starting with you, David.
So you can find me on the web at davidbco.com. I believe it's in my name on the screen. I am currently finishing up work on a Celtic urban fantasy that Jean Marie mentioned early in the broadcast. The third book comes out on August 4th, so it will be out by the time this airs. The series is called The Chalice War, and this is Sword, the third book in the series. And they are snarky and exciting and fun, and they have been a blast to work on. And they're put out by Bellbridge Books.
Great. Jason, what's your most recent project, and where can folks find you on the web?
Yeah, well, where you can find me is jasonpalmatier.com, which is a fairly new website. I think the thing I have latest is I do have a story in the ZNB Solar Flare, and it is hopeful, but the conflict is that if it's all hopeful and everything's been solved, what if you're like a rebellious teenager who doesn't, like it boring? And so that's the conflict.
I remember those days. I was so stupid.
Yeah. And then the other stuff that I have currently out, the latest is I was, of course, in. My main claim to fame now is that I was in Writers of the Future for last, volume 39. And
Congratulations.
Yeah, that's probably I guess Solar Flare came out just after this got published. And then I think my next project, of course, is going to be the Shared World. I'll probably write that up first. And then the story that won for Writers of the Future, I plan to turn into, it's not going to be the same characters, but in the same world, into a novel, because that story is about AI, which I wrote before AI became this big thing. And so afterwards, I was like, while writing that short story, there was a lot of interesting things that come out of having AIs at the level that they are at in that short story. So I'm going to work on a novel version of that next.
Okay, great. Troy, what about you? Your most recent work, where folks can find you on the web?
You can find me at troycarrollbutcher.com. Not much recent in the last couple of years, but you can find me at ZNB and at DAW and Amazon.
Great. So, and finally you, Joshua, you get the second to the last word.
Okay, everybody ready? I am, besides running Zombies Need Brains, I write epic fantasy, and I have a couple series out with DAW, so you can find all of those at joshuapalmatier.com. You can find the Zombies webpage at zombiesneedbrains.com. You can find us at Patreon. Just search for Zombies Need Brains. I'm sure we'll pop right up. And me and Zombies are both on Facebook and on Twitter. So Facebook, it's Joshua B. Palmatier, and it's Zombies Need Brains on Facebook. And then on Twitter, which I guess is called X now.
But they haven't changed their URL, so we might as well call it Twitter.
Yeah, so X, Twitter, whatever the hell it's called now. You can find me at Ben Tate Author. So that's a horrendously long story, so ignore that. And then Zombies is under ZNB LLC. So find us there as well, if you're still there. I know a lot of people are vacating, but I can't think of any place else where we are at the moment. So that should be it.
Give it time. Give it time.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you all for joining us here tonight. And thank you out there in the audience for viewing. We hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you'll support the Kickstarter.